What is up, you guys? Welcome back. Check out what we were going to be building today. It's going to be a liquid menu by making use of After Effects for the JSON or animation export, and using that in Flutter to create a sort of nice liquid transition. So a lot of cool stuff going on in this tutorial. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the coding. We're using After Effects because we are going to create some sort of liquid custom animation. You can afterwards export as a JSON file and use that in your Android Studio projects. So what is it going to look like? What we're building here is going to be something that is very hard to make, let's say, if you would make it in code. So that's why we're using a more animation tool to create this kind of effect. So what do you need to get started? You can download body moving by going to exchange.adobe.com. If you install it right here, this will get added to your Creative Cloud automatically. And then afterwards, if you've restarted After Effects, you can see the plugin by going to Window, Extensions, and then Body Moving. Just make sure you restart After Effects, otherwise it won't show up. If, however, you don't have After Effects installed and you don't want to install it for some reason, or you don't have it, you can still follow along this tutorial because the export we're using is going to be of type JSON, and the JSON file is also included in the GitHub project, so you don't really need to follow along. It's just like if you want to get more into these kind of animations you can use for your mobile application projects or any Flutter project really. I'll give you some tips to get started in After Effects. So let's see how the After Effects file is constructed. If you see in the liquid composition, and After Effects works with composition. For example, this is our main render composition, which I'm using for the output render. If you tap on it, we can see actually what's inside the application. The main thing about the animation here is everything is animated through paths. We are just adding simple keyframes to the path, which is a shape layer, and I've handily drawn all the Beziers on this, which create this kind of liquid graph effect, and then animated it from scratch. To be honest, there's no like rocket science to this. It's like almost like doing this frame by frame to get it almost right, because again, we're not using any physics simulation. We're doing this all from scratch, right? So you need to have some sort of like understanding for animation in order to make it look like a bit more natural. That's it. But if you are interested in it, I can show you really quick how you would do this. So you can create a new comp by going to Composition, New Composition. This is all fine. Select your specs and hit OK. With the pen tool selected, we can quickly create a shape. This can be whatever shape you want. If you want these handles, you can press Alt, for example, and drag one handle like this to control the edges really. Select a layer. You can press on the U key to show all the properties on that shape. Then we can press, for example, because we want to animate the path, we want to put the first keyframe on the path. Then something really cool I'm using all the time is a short key to shift 10 keyframes, 10 frames really. And you can do that by using Control Shift right arrow key. So Control Shift right arrow key is going to move 10 frames in the timeline. If you just want to move one frame, you can press Control arrow key to the right without the shift. But in our case, it's really useful to just shift 10 frames and then select, for example, that path, move everything a bit down. There you go. Of course, this is, if you're looking to the final product, it's a lot more fine-tuned. But basically, this is the main idea of how you would animate this. Only to get it right, it takes a bit more time and finesse, let's say. But that's not why we are doing this tutorial. I'm not going to explain you guys how to animate. I'm just showing you how you could use this as a workflow for your projects. And so let's just jump into Android Studio, use the JSON file of our output. Again, if you want to use the body movement plugin whenever your composition or your animation is ready, you can select which comp you want to render from here. Just hit render, select the destination folder, and this will output your JSON file. So let's just hop into Android Studios and let's go from there. Okay, so going in the starter project, let's have a quick look at our pubspec.yaml file. And the three packages I'm using is provider for state management, which you don't really need to worry about because I've already set it up in order for you to change the state in the app. Then the most important package is going to be the Lottie package. To see what it actually is, Lottie is the same as body moving. It's just a different name, and it's also acquired by Airbnb. It just gives you the support by using the body moving plugin or use that exported data from After Effects in Android Studio. You can, if you want to have some more a detailed look about what you can do with it, feel free to have a look at the README page, but I'll explain you most bits to get you started right away. Then the last package I'm using is something we're going to use for styling our buttons, and it's going to solve using a lot of boilerplate. I mean, we don't really need the package, but the package gives you some nice design features if you want some neumorphic design. And people who don't know, if you don't know what neumorphic design is, it's basically a flat skeuomorphism design, right? Which create this like fake 3D look while you're actually working with 2D layers. So I think it's a quite nice kind of design thing, but again, this is very subjective, but I thought why not use it for this project. So we're using that for our buttons, just so you know. So let's, oh yeah, also our data file. If you check the data file, this is our output from After Effects. If you want to have a look into it, it's not very interesting. It's just one a big one-line JSON file with all the data from our shapes. But you can see how it's reading our file. You can see our shape layers are coming back in here as well. Let's go to the main.tar file. This is where I'm setting up our provider. This is our model, which this is going to be responsible for our business logic, or it's going to be very minimal for this app. But again, this is where you would store all the business logic. Let's go into our home view and let's start building our app. Let's start by converting the stateless widget to a stateful widget because we're going to use an animation controller, and it's also always a good idea to have your root application to have it a stateful widget. So let's convert this to a stateful widget. Let's create our animation controller, which is a private variable. That's why you're using an underscore in front of it to make it private. This is just a habit you should always do with controllers or anything you want to be available just for this class. Let's hit Ctrl O to create our initState method. Let's call the superclass superinitState, and this is where we would initialize our animation controller. So we can copy the animation controller and we can set it to an actual object. You want to add a vsync in here, which is going to be part of this, and this refers to our class or home view state. Then you also add a duration, and that duration is going to be I always use milliseconds because you can have much more precise than just using seconds or whatever. 1000 for 1 second, semicolon at the end. And to get rid of the vsync error, you need to just add something behind the state of our home view, and you can say single provider state mixin. This will solve this error. Note that if you're using multiple animations, you should just remove this single. It's going to be the same, it's just when you're having multiple animations. But in our case, we can leave that as is because we are just focusing on one animation. And then also let's hit Ctrl O again. to add or dispose methods. It's always a good habit to dispose any controller you're using whenever the view is not active. But in this case, the view is always going to be active. But let's say you're navigating to a different page. When this happens, the dispose method is going to be called, and you don't want to be listening to any animations updates anymore. So this is just a performance thing you should do. They always dispose something before you call the superclass, and here notice that we are doing it after the init state. Cool. So let's create the root of our application then. It's a good habit whenever you're using a material app, the home of the material app, in the build file, it should always return a scaffold. And you should, a scaffold, you can have multiple scaffolds in an app, but you should only have one material app in one app. And a scaffold starts, of course, with a body, and this is where we're gonna add a stack. Because we're stacking, we're gonna stack two different layers on top of each other to create that liquid effect. So let's create a stack. Stack has children, same as a row and a column. Only a row and a column, you can't really put them on top of each other. So in our case, we're gonna use a stack. Hit save to reformat everything. Don't worry about the error for now, that's fine. It shouldn't give an error when you do a hot restart. So let's also give our main scaffold a background color. I want to give it a color of colors.gray. Note when you're using this, you can actually shift around by using adding a sort of array to this. If you go all the way up to 800 or 700, you can see it's going to be much darker. But 300 will give you a little bit lighter result. You can do a hot reload and you see the background a little bit darker. Also, let's just make sure our stack alignment, or all the children in our stack, is going to have alignment of center. And then in here we want to create, because we're going to stack two, to create the liquid effect, we're going to have to stack two liquid Lottie assets on top of each other, or the body moving assets. And this is going to be our custom class, but for now I'm going to call it liquid. And the logic in here is going to be, I want to make sure if it's going to be flipped or not, because this is something, again, because we're only working with one asset, we have to flip it by ourselves on the vertical axis. So for now, I'm going to set flip to false, and then we need to pass our controller to handle the animations in the class as well. So you pass our private animation variable. So let's get rid of this error, and let's go to select the widget folder. And I'm going to go to new and add a new Dart file. And I'm going to call this liquid, just as easy as that. Then in the liquid.dart file, I'm going to type stless or stateless, and then I'm going to call liquid. I'm going to call it liquid. I mean the same. Let's press Alt Enter and just import the necessary packages. Now let's get rid of this error, and let's just import the liquid file or the liquid class we just created. Then going back in our liquid stateless widget, we of course need to set our properties on the class, which is going to be the animation controller, and I'm going to call it the same, and then also the or boolean checker to see whether or not it's flipped. Then to make it usable outside of the class, you need to set up the constructor as well. And you would say this by this dot controller, and this dot is flipped. Put a semicolon at the end. Normally all the errors should be gone. Now let's actually display our liquid animation, so we can quickly get an understanding about how this is actually working. So let's remove this container, and we can say, okay, Lottie dot, and again, press Alt Enter and make use of our package. Now you can say Lottie.assets, and this is going to require a string name. Remember, we've put it in our data file, so you can just write data/liquids.json. And let's just hit run to see what it's going to do. So it's auto-playing and it's repeating itself all the time. And this is where, if we want to control more about it, that's why we're using an animation controller or passing the animation controller down to control this actually. But this is a quick result. This was really easy to import it. And let's just now fine-tune it as well. Let's just center our Lottie assets, hit hot reload to center it in the screen. And I want to stop the animating that it's repeating, so they come with a handy properties, like you can set the animate to false. If you hot reload now, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to stay there, and that's exactly what we want because we're going to control it. Then, secondly, we can pass in our controller. Just hit save to see the stack nicely. Let's put a comma behind all the... And also let's specify a height of our Lottie asset. I'm just gonna create a double height. Set it to 200 so we can reuse it throughout our widgets. And another really cool thing about Lottie is that we can have delegates. And you need to set it to Lottie delegates. And every delegate, so what this is going to do is like we can change the color of our JSON file or the animation at runtime. So we don't need to re-export it in After Effects if you want to change color, for example. So this takes the values. Value is just going to be a list type. And then here we can set value delegates and you can see whatever you can use. This is all properties in After Effects, but for us it's just going to be color. And here you would specify a key path. Let's open that up. Let's create a constant variable and then open an array, right? And now we want to add, I'll explain this in a sec, but there's two things we need, right? We have a rectangle path, rectangle, and everything in After Effects is called rectangle1 on specific layers. And we want to access this fill property because that's going to be doing the fill. And then our value. So I'm going to make this red so we can actually see the changes happening. And then we can copy this because remember we are in an array. So let's copy this. And instead of using rectangle, we want to use shape. Because in our After Effects file, we were using shapes and we were using rectangles. The two asterisks means that it's going to take all the layers. Otherwise, we need to specify each layer name and we would have a longer list. But in our case, because we're changing everything, we can just use the asterisk. This will loop through all the layers and just look for the rectangle and the fill one. So let's hot reload, and this will change the color at runtime. So how cool is that? So you don't even need to go back to After Effects to change this. I think it's really handy. You can change a lot of properties, mess around with it, but for us, this is fine. So let's change the colors to something more usable for this design, and we can make use of our global class. I've set up some colors in there. We can use them in here as well. So let's import that Dart file as well. And let's use the background color of the global property I specified. You can copy this, remove it, and let's do a hot reload. And we're going to see it's just like a sort of, it's not fully white, but it has some, it's a bit more gray than normal white. Okay, so let's add two of these to get started, because remember, we're going to create a full liquid menu and not just a solo liquid item like it is now. So let's head over back to our home view. And so right here where we add our children, we can copy this and let's paste it in there as well. And the only thing we need to do now is we want to set the flip value to true for the one we are actually going to flip. Now let's go in the liquids again, and we should wrap our lottie.asset file with a transform, because what we're going to do is we are going to flip it. So what you can do is make use of the transform widget, which has a transform property. This expects in return a matrix 4 value. What you can take now is the identity, and then using the dot syntax we can scale or flip in our case. So how does this actually work? For example, we're going to have a conditional statement by making use of the isFlipped we specified outside of this class, and we actually want to remember we want to flip on the flip it vertically, not in this way, but we want to flip it upside down. And the way we do this, it's going to be either way 1 or -1. So we can check for when it's flipped, we want to set this to -1, and otherwise we should set this to 1. And you can do a hot reload, and now this is what you're going to get. The only thing you still need to do, because we flip it and we need to transform or translate the position, because we're using matrix for that identity, we can add properties on this by using the same kind of dot syntax. So you can use translate, the x value is going to remain the same. Then for the y value, we still need to check again, is flipped. Then you want to be, let's say minus that height we've used, ×2, and then this is kind of the offset, because I'll show you in a bit why this, I've set it up the way this is, and this would be minus height plus 50, again, similar offset. Let's add a comma. We don't need to add a comma. So to get rid of what we're actually seeing here, because we don't want to see this at this stage, we should wrap or transform widget into a animated container, because we want to animate them like with the springy, bouncy, elastic out movement, like you show in the example. I showed it in the beginning of the video. So let's specify duration, because that's a required property for an animated container. Because we're using a elastic, you want to make sure the milliseconds, you take a little bit more time, because it's going to have overlapping values like for the bounciness, and it's going to take longer. Otherwise it's going to feel way too fast. So the curve, we want to set the curves to elastic out, and then there is going to be a transform property which is going to be responsible for the main translation when we are going to tap on the button. And let's use a dot syntax again. Again, the x value is not important for us. The one we're going to be really interested in is going to be this, but we're going to handle this logic in our model class in a bit, so I'll leave that open for now. And we want to add a decoration, just like you can do with a normal container. We want to add a decoration property, because we want the rounded corners to match the ones in our shape layer from After Effects. So you can do that by setting the box decoration. When you're using a decoration, remember you have to specify the color of the container in here as well. You can't do it outside of here. So let's do that by our global class, this big background color. And then we want to specify the border radius, and we can just say border radius dot all, and then radius dot circular. I'm gonna try and match this. What is this gonna be? Let's put a comma here and put a comma here. It's gonna do a hot reload. And let's also add in our height, which we specified at the top, so we don't need to retype it every time. So now, this is actually still looking some bit weird, but let's go to our model class, and we need to do some specifications for opening the menu. So what we want to do, we want to create a getter and a setter value for the menu. So you would do that by creating a private variable for example, the open value. At start it's going to be null or null, and then we would use a getter. Let's copy this, and this is going to be public, and this is always going to return the private variable. And then the setter method is where we can notify all the listeners whenever we update this with a value. So let's set it equal to the value you passed in, and then you simply notify the listeners. Then going back to the liquid class, let's fix our translates, and specifically the y value. So again, we want to check for the is flipped boolean, and then we want to say we need to make use of the model. But firstly, let's go to right underneath our build method and create our provider model. So the way you would do that is, again, you can use provider dot, and then alt enter on provider, import the package, and now you can do off context. And right after the off, you can specify our model, which is gonna be home model. And then again, alt enter, and we can import the package. And now we can copy model, or we can use it here, and we can say model.open value, and we want the negative of this because it's going to be flipped. And again, we want some sort of offset for this, similar to here, open value, and you want the opposite happening. It's going to be plus. So let's also go to our home view, and let's add some main padding on the stack. Let's say something like 40. Let's do a hot reload. So we have some sort of a bit more like breathing space for the overall cards or the overall liquid animation. Cool. Going back to our home view. So what we want to do now is we want to wrap our transform in a stack, and you can just use column and then replace column by stack, because it's the same, it's going to take children as well. And what we want to do is, because we want to make it clickable, and we want an action to happen when you click on the button we're going to put here. Let's go all the way under the bottom of the stack, which is here. And now we can actually make use of our other library of the cards. And the way this works, so we need to do a simple check again whenever it's flipped, right? This is one way of doing this. Like you can use a size box if you don't want to display anything. And the other way, we are going to display our new card, which is something the library provides for the neumorphism cards. And let's see what properties we can add for it. So we can add some width, we can add some height to it. Let's just use 88. I want a very big button. You can use a bevel, and the bevel, I'll show you in a bit what that is. That's actually going to be the sort of the size of the blur next to it. And then you, it kind of works similar to a sort of container, because you can add a decoration as well. And then you would, instead of like using a box decoration, you can use a neumorphic decoration. And we want to give it a color, right? And let's say, for example, just use colors.white for now. And also let's give it a sort of border radius border radius. We can use border radius, where is it? Dot circular, yeah. And then 8 or something to use it like this. And then let's use that, let's give it a child. Oh, not in decoration, but in here. Let's give it a child, and I want to use an icon for this. And the icon is going to be of type lock, which is going to look something like this. And I want that color, let's see, not in here, but I want in the icon, I want to add a color. And let's use that pink color we saw an example of, the pink accents we were using in the example as well. Cool, let's do a quick hot reload to see where you're gonna get. Don't worry about this for now, it's because we are overlapping something in the stack. But let's see what we can do to fix this. In our stack, let's set the alignment to center at first. And now we need to go back to our home view and actually take this liquid, right? And then put it on top of here, because that's what's causing the overlapping issue. And you can see here we're having a sort of like quite nice skeuomorphic kind of type. Now let's just change something as well so it's a bit more prominent. In the new cards, they also have a property that's called a curve type. And let's use the curve because they're going to make use of some enums they specified in the library. And the emboss is something we're going to use to click when you click it. And the concave, I think it's convex right now, but concave, we'll see it's going to be a bit more visible than the convex we were using in a bit. Now we need to do actually some more business logic by going to our home model. And we need to keep track of like whether or not the menu is open, and we can do that in a similar way. Actually, let's just copy this because we need similar getter and setters, but in this case it's going to be of type Boolean, right? And we want to set this to is opening. So that's it's like a sort of busy state, and you would set this to false by default. Let's change, copy these, and then paste them here as well, and just remove the underscore, and you got exactly what you want as well. Then for the business logic part, we want to set a sort of a method, which is a void method, right? And we want to set it to open liquid menu. And in here, we also need to pass in not an animated container, but or animation. Let's see, animation controller. I'm going to call this controller. And then I'll print out, because it's quite handy when you see when it's opening, menu is opening. And the first thing you want to do is you want to make use of the Boolean getter and setter we just provided. So we can say the is opening, right? Should always be, we're not going to set false or true, we're just going to do it like this. This solves that issue very quick, because this will always set it to the opposite value. It's false is true or false. Then whenever you are, I'm just going to copy this so I don't need to type it in again. Whenever this is opening, we want to make use of the open value we created, remember, here at the top, which is by default null. You set it to something like 75. This can be anything you want. Then you are going to make use of the controller we passed in, and you want to set the animation to going forwards. Otherwise, our open value should be again reset to null, and then we are resetting the controller as well to make the loop happening. And then all the way at the end, because we're using provider, we need to notify all our listeners outside of the class. Cool. So let's go back to our liquid class. And now we are actually gonna see what we're gonna do. We want some action to happening, right, when we click the button. And let's see, so you want to wrap that new card. You can use a center, but then wrap it in a sort of gesture detector, and then we can use the onTapped property on there. And then we can again make use of the model in here, and you would say open the liquid menu and you pass in that controller like this way. We will handle all the business logic in here. So let's do a quick hot restart at the moment. And let's tap to see what's going to happen. And yeah, there you go. This is doing pretty much like the way we want it. But let's fine tune it a bit. So what we can do now with our, we can add some more conditionals for when you press that button and you actually want this to change. So remember, we can make use of the model. So whenever the model is opening, we want to change the curve type and not the concave. We want it to make emboss, and otherwise it's gonna be the starting position. So if I'm rebuilding this and I'm gonna click it, you're gonna see that little change, right? The only thing you do need to do now is we want to change the color on the neumorphic as well. So whenever the model again is opening, let's see, and I've specified a color in our global class. It's called active color, which is specifically for that button. So if I'm tapping it now again, it's gonna show like you get this like similar kind of effect, like a 3D button is actually pressed. And remember, because we are in an animated container, or the way the package works is that everything you change is going to animate as well. So this gives an even more like realistic touch to it, I guess. The only thing now is like we need to again swap out the icon whenever the model is opening. So you want to say icons.lock, and it's going to be a sort of outline open. Otherwise it's locked. So if I'm hot rebuilding this again, and there you go. And this is why I think using this provider package and handling all the business logic in your home model class comes in really handy, because you can update the UI wherever you want it, how you want it, and you can make things quite complex, to be honest. So the last thing you want to do, we had a text here, right? So let's go to our home view class, and we can simply add, because we want to add it in the bottom, we can say a sort of text widget, and this is gonna be, okay, I'm gonna call this liquid menu. Then we want to make use of the to uppercase functionality. If you don't want it, just leave it out. And then you want to add a style to that, which has to be of type text style. And then here we can specify the font weight. And we actually want a very fat font, but you can say font weight.w900. By default, this font is going to be Roboto, which in most cases works quite nice. Then font size, I don't know, maybe like 40. Let's do a hot reload. Seems about right. And let's just give it a similar color of that color, of the pink color. So we're going to use the pink accents. There you go. So now we get this overlapping effect, and you can see what's actually happening. Now let's just bring this design just to the next level and add the final touches to it. We want a similar kind of effect, but on the animated container. But because we are doing custom things in the middle, let's just do this kind of similar effect by ourselves. And you can do it actually very easy, and I'll show you right now. So let's go to our liquid class. Let's go to the animated container. Let's add a comma here. And where we want to be is in the decoration as well, or in the box decoration. And a box decoration also has something called box shadow. Box shadow, this expects a list of box shadows, right? So you can add as many as we want, but in our case, we only need one, because outside of it, we're calling this 2 times, right? So each container only needs one. And a box shadow has properties like, a blur radius, which is a float, and then we're gonna add a sort of color to it. So let's see. I want to see whenever it's flipped, or if I'm flipping, if it's flipped, you want to set this to white. Otherwise, we're setting it to a sort of gray color, similar to this one. So you can say 350. I've experimented with it a bit. I'm not just guessing the numbers. And let's put a comma here. Let's just hot reload. See, and immediately you can see a big change here, but let's just offset it as well a bit, because you can see the white is more to the left here, and like the grayer blurred shadow is a bit more to the right. So let's replicate that by creating an offset on this, which expects an offset class. And again, we want to make use of our is flipped because we're using two cards. When it's flipped, so the top one, this card, right? This is the flipped card, remember? And when it's flipped, you want it to offset a bit more to the left. So you would do that by adding a negative value. And in the other case, it's going to be a positive value. And again, use the is flipped for the Y. When it's flipped, you want it to offset a bit to the top, right? The top. And when it's on the bottom, you want to offset it a bit more on the Y. So you would do a positive value again. Do a hot reload, and you can see a little shift. And instantly we get this kind of cool 3D, fake 3D kind of neumorphic realistic style to it. And guys, there you go. I don't think it was too hard to make this, but you can see, like, by combining After Effects and using the tools in Android Studio, we can actually make something very custom, very quick as well. Like, you can imagine doing this from scratch in code is gonna be a hell. I can assure you that, because there's just too much organicness and too much things going on. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, hit like and subscribe to my channel for more videos coming up soon. See you guys later.